to work in this kind of environment where the local sergeant, a blow-in called Brannigan, who's hostile to her from the start and very sexist. So she's up against him. Her boss keeps hitting on her married boss, and she's having trouble with her on-off boyfriend who keeps breaking up with her because of her irregular hours. So she has all these trials and tribulations of her own as she tries to investigate the killer of the Strand baby.
All very plausible and all very in keeping, I suppose, with the era, given that it's set in 1989. And as the story goes on, then she's in Derry. Some of the investigation leads her into Derry, and she comes to the attention of the IRA as well as the British Army. So it's it works on a number of different levels, in that there's the whole mystery, there's the crime to solve, and then there's the her life as a detective and coming to Donegal and meeting resistance, and the whole sexism within Gardaí, and there's different strands to it.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I chose Donegal because I know Donegal so well. My parents grew up there, and I spent many summers, as you mentioned. But I chose 1989 as well because the mindset at that time was still, like the 50s and 60s, where women could be vilified for becoming pregnant. And at one point, Frankie asks in the novel, do we not value pregnancy and birth in this country? So it was, at that time, it's an underlying theme is, the morality policing that's going on, Yeah.
And of course, there's going to be parallels drawn with the real life story of Joanne Hayes.
That's right. No, that's right. And while there are echoes of the Kerry baby's story in it, this isn't that story. Initial similarities. There are initial similarities, but as I said, the underlying story that I wanted to tell was how we treated women in the 1980s and before that, of course, as well.
Yeah. You spent a lot of your summers in Gweedore. Good memories of the place, not just at Port Arthur, but in other beaches and other parts. Your parents were from Gweedore, and your grandparents as well. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. My grandparents, and I a couple of years ago, I tried my hand at a family memoir. I was very impressed with the Wild Swans novel of 3 generations of Chinese women, and I thought this would be a wonderful thing to do. So I was, I started to do some research, and in fact, on my mother's side, I can trace my grandmother right back to before the famine and that. Now, I didn't go further back than that, but I in the end I parked that project for the moment. But I have a great interest in, and when last June I was up with some of my family, and we go back to the old places, and we discuss the families, and we're very embedded in Gweedore, both on my mother's side and my father's side, and we used to spend every July and August in Gweedore, and just have a great affinity for the place, and for the people, and have so many connections there,
Yeah, and your grandparents had connections to, am I right, not one but 2 small shops, and was there homemade ice cream made in one of them?
That's right. Yes, that's Boner, my grandmother's sister. She learned ice cream making from an Italian family, and when she spent a spell in Glasgow, in Scotland, and she came back. Her husband died in Scotland, and she was left a young widow with a young child. And she set up a little ice cream shop in Glasgow, then came back to Bunbeg and opened a little shop in Bunbeg. In fact, it was a little shop like set into a gigantic boulder. Now it expanded since that time, but it was a tiny place. She made her own ice cream, and it was, wonderfully good, as you can imagine. I mean, it was the talk of the whole townland, probably beyond. She was a lovely, lovely woman, great businesswoman, very independent and very admirable. And she reared a son there. And my grandmother also opened a shop in Lunya. That's where I spent. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and she had a little shop. It wasn't quite as successful as Boner's. She also did other things. She had a cow and had reared hens and sold eggs and a kind of a mini farm, if you like, grew her own potatoes. She was also an amazing woman. Her husband, my grandfather, spent all of his working life in Glasgow, and she came back at one stage and built the bungalow in Lunya and reared 6 children there. So yes, wonderful women and great connections with Scotland. I was very, very conscious of the connections. So she lived in Lunya, and that was my mother's side, yeah.
Well,
and in fact, there was a brother as well that had a shop, too, yeah.
And now there's a novelist in the family, and I know you've written short stories and poems in the past, but now this is your first novel. Just to remind listeners that it's called Limbo, and there's going to be more Kate Francis mysteries. I'm told.
That's right. When Poolbeg contacted me to offer me a publication, they offered me, it was a 3-book contract, right. And what they were interested in was more in the same genre, which is crime writing, and if possible the same character. I hadn't actually thought through beyond Limbo at that point, but once I got this proposal, it seemed the right thing to do, and I was very excited about it, and already I have started on book 2, and it's outlined, so it's in the pipeline. Okay. Not finished now. I mean, just started.
Well, we'll be able to follow Frankie and find out how she gets on with her next mystery. But in the meantime, This one is called Limbo and described as fiction with an edge, which is a great way to describe it. Maureen Gallagher, thank you very much for chatting to us.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Want unbeatable value from Sky? Here's the deal. Get Sky Broadband Plus, our award-winning Sky Q box, for the amazing low price of just €39 a month. Super fast, super reliable broadband. And Sky